You're back for another video. Well, welcome to my studio where I'm going to paint some jars with pickles. Now you can actually see them behind me, both of them. Now if you've seen the previous video that I did, you will know that I struggled really with the lesson where Andrew painted a jar with chili pickles in it. That was just, not a mess, but it was kind of a fail. So what I do in this video is I go back to my roots a little bit, watercolor painting, and I'm going to see how I can improve my painting, comparing that to the way Andrew paints his oil paintings, and see if I can somehow convert this to acrylic paintings, just letting go of the watercolor painting and moving on to a more realistic painting. And I can tell you already, yes, I managed to do that. I did pretty well in the end, but it was a challenge to get there. So join me where I go back to my root and make a comparison between watercolor and the oil painting, and then finally move on to getting it all right and painting the jar as it is supposed to be. If you've seen my previous video, you know that my jar didn't work out as it should have worked out. I kind of failed at it. I didn't get my mixes right. I didn't get the relationship between the content of the jar right. So I'm gonna do this again in this video, and I'm gonna approach it slightly differently to see what I'm doing wrong. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna use some acrylic paper. I've got this jar with pickles, a real jar of pickles, and I'm gonna paint with my acrylics, but I'm gonna paint totally watercolor style as I would normally do, and that will help me to understand the relationship between the watercolor paints and the oil paints and what goes wrong and where the differences are. So I thought, let me go back one step and just paint as I normally will do and see then the result of that, and then probably hopefully figure out along the way what the difference is between what Andrew does, how he paints his glass, and how I normally paint my glass. So as you can see, I'm just painting this loose, freehand, just sketched the jar and everything and the content and mixed some paint. And this is not going to be the best painting there is. This is just an exercise for me to understand what's going on and where I am going wrong. And then I'm going to paint, of course, a second one with trying to catch the philosophy behind painting these objects in a glass and how the transparency works and how to paint glass without actually painting the glass, because I figured that much, I figured out that much, that you're painting the glass without really painting the glass, because it's all in relationship to the objects, the surrounding. So this is my normal way of painting, just quickly using water. I'm not using even any medium here, I'm just using water. I'm using these acrylics as watercolor, and they work really good like that. It's probably a bit closer to gouache, but I really like gouache, so that's not a problem. Now here is the whole thing with the watercolor style. Now I'm just actually painting the glass, and I'm painting some shadows, some dark tones, some of these lines that give the shape and the form of the glass, and eventually use the white to get in some highlights. And then this really looks like glass, but it is an illustration. I wouldn't say this is realistic, this is more like an illustration. Okay, I've got to complete this painting a little bit, get a nice, well, not a nice ground, but it works. So here's the painting. This is how I would normally paint my glass. Now here's the second one. I already prepared the background for this. I'm going to use exactly the same color. This is a burnt sienna color on the painting. I'm going to use that same jar, but I'm now going to use the flow medium to help me with the sketch. And then later on I'm going to pick up the gel again. So I'm sketching freehand again, the same object, same subject, and that's sketching. Wow, you can see my lid is not the best. Some correction here and there, but it's not the best. So here I'm going to try to paint again while listening to Andrew, and I've watched the video a couple of times, and I think I understand what he's getting at. And as said already, it's not about painting the actual glass, but figuring out what the relationship between the content in the jar, the fluid and the glass, and how that they all play and work together. And that just, I needed a shift in my brain. Now, I'm going to start again with this lid, and I'm not even going to do the best lid. There's just make it sufficient that you clearly see that it is a lid, because this exercise for me wasn't about the lid, but it was about the content of the jar and trying to get glass. So to get glass, I want to paint these pickles first again, but the next thing which I really paid attention to was to my mixes. I mixed differently than the previous one, where I just went overboard probably with the mixes, way too strong, a bit more transparent mixes, and also creating some fluid and placing the highlight and the darker tones where they should really be, so that slowly but surely the glass will actually appear without painting the glass. And as you can see, this already looks way better, and I'm not even done. This already looks way better than my previous one where I followed him along. And now I'm going to place the highlights. I'm going to place them pretty strategically, same with the darker points, the darker spots, and think about every stroke I'm doing, not mindlessly, but really paying attention to what I'm painting. Now with the previous jar, I ran into the problem that the paint is too opaque. My paint wasn't transparent enough, and that is why I got layers on top of my content, and that made just, instead of letting the glass appear, it enhanced the content. And now I'm using a glaze medium to help me mix some more transparent colors, and that really worked well. Not only that, also getting the relationship between the highlights, the shadows right, and getting some more less opaque mixes, that really worked well. And as you can see, this really looks like a jar with content. And I'm just painting the ground again. I'm not paying too much attention, because for me it's all about getting the glass right, because I realized that is really important. And that was the shift in my mind, to not paint the glass, but to actually paint the content. All right, and here are all three of them. The one Andrew painted with the really nice glass. The first one I painted, which wasn't a success, because somehow my glass got lost, really lost. So I painted it again in watercolor style to just get the difference and see what I was doing. And then I went back to the regular paints, used the gel medium and the glazing medium, so that I could actually paint the glass without painting the glass. And as you can see, that worked really well. With this one, the first one, the glass disappeared. Here the glass is way too strong it's like an illustration, the watercolor one, but the final one, the one in the middle, that one worked out. And I'm really happy that there was this shift in my mind to figure out what was going wrong and how to paint the glass without actually painting the glass. And now my pickles are definitely in a jar with some kind of fluid, and I would call this lesson finished, successful, and caught what I needed to catch. Yeah, let me say it like that.